I think many people have seen the classic American TV series, Prison Break. Today, we're going to talk about a real prison break, the escape from Alcatraz Island. This is the most famous prison break in American history. Where is Alcatraz Island? It was a very famous American prison, located on a small island in San Francisco Bay, California. This small island, originally named Alcatraz, has an area of only 0.08 square kilometers, surrounded by cliffs with no beaches. The water around the island is extremely deep. The distance to the nearest shore is 2.4 kilometers, a very suitable place to build a prison, like placing a rock on the sea and then placing a prison on this rock. Therefore, this island is also called the Giant Rock Island. This place was originally a military base, but in 1906, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake occurred in San Francisco. Many buildings collapsed and the prison in the city caught fire, so they began to evacuate prisoners outside. However, the outside was a mess, and among these prisoners were serious criminals who could not be placed anywhere. Therefore, they urgently brought these 176 prisoners to the island. That way, they wouldn't be in any danger and couldn't escape. Then, because of this incident, it was discovered that this island was too suitable for building a prison. Therefore, in 1912, the U.S. federal government built a huge prison on this island. Since then, the name of the island has also changed, from Giant Rock Island to Prison Island. Then, in the 1930s, the Great Depression occurred in the United States, and a large number of armed and violent criminals appeared everywhere, all organized. It was very unsafe to keep these criminals in ordinary prisons, because criminal organizations would come to rescue them. For example, if the boss was imprisoned here, while outside, his accomplices would come to the rescue. Therefore, the bosses of criminal organizations were all imprisoned on this island. For example, take the notorious American gang leader Al Capone, the founder of the Chicago outfit. Imprisoning him in a normal prison wouldn't do. He had to be held on this island to prevent any chance of a rescue by boat. Therefore, on this island, all of them were gangsters. So what kind of people were imprisoned on this island? They were people who were very good at escaping from prison, meaning that ordinary prisons could no longer hold them. Every time they were imprisoned, they would escape. So they were imprisoned on the island, just like Michael Scofield in Prison Break. He would definitely be imprisoned here. And since then, ordinary prisoners were no longer imprisoned on this island, only serious violent criminals, those who often escaped from prison, those who had been sentenced to hundreds of years in prison, were imprisoned here. And also from then on, the name of this island changed again, from Prison Island to Alcatraz Island. Thus, this place became a gathering place for demons. Even the security level was the highest. The entire prison has 600 rooms, all of which are not connected to the outside wall, meaning that there are no windows in the prison cell that can see the outside. Moreover, all the fences in the prison, including the door fences or some railings inside, all the fences were made of special steel. If you use ordinary tools, you can't pry it open. Furthermore, there are watchtowers on all four sides of the prison. This surveillance post is not called a watchtower but a gun tower. The people on it are all holding guns, aiming at the prison. Standing on this watchtower, you can see all the rooms in the prison. And this watchtower also uses iron to rotate, so it certainly cannot be entered from the outside. And inside the prison's dining hall, on the ceiling, they also put tear gas bombs, which can be remotely controlled. That is, once a riot occurs, the watchtower will take control. They can start deploying tear gas. This island is called Alcatraz. The guard is extremely strict, and it is isolated from the mainland, but in fact, the environment on this island is extremely good. Because they only imprison people who have committed heinous crimes here, the rate of violence in prison is also low. With 600 cells that have never been fully occupied, it guaranteed one room per person. Moreover, the food is especially good. The food must be delicious, and not only is it filling, but it must also be nutritious, with everything. In addition, as long as the prisoners have good behavior, they can read books. There are more than 15,000 books that can be viewed at will. They can even be given musical instruments, allowed to self-study, can also draw, paper, pens, or paints, anything can be provided. If they behave even better, they can watch a movie once a month. So, as long as they behave well, they can live very comfortably in there. Therefore, many ordinary prisoners who are imprisoned in other prisons ask to be transferred to this island. What they care about most is having one room per person. Because in ordinary prisons, they say they are bullied by other inmates in the same room, so having one room per person is really important to them. Since this prison was built, it has always been considered an inescapable prison. Because its environment is really special, the island is surrounded by cliffs, the water around is very deep and extremely cold. Another thing is that the surrounding waters are full of sharks, mainly great white sharks. Moreover, there are lighthouses, patrol boats, and watchtowers all around the island, so it is definitely impossible to escape. However, in fact, since the prison was built, more than 30 people have tried to escape. Of those, 23 were recaptured, 6 were shot dead, and 2 drowned. But in 1962, about 60 years ago, 3 people successfully escaped, or rather disappeared from this prison. Actually, a total of 4 people escaped together, but 1 was recaptured. Of these 4, 1 was named Frank Morris, and there were 2 brothers, John Anglin and Clarence Anglin. And there was 1 more person, Alan West. First, let's briefly introduce these 4 people. Morris had a reputation for being very intelligent. At the age of 11, he was abandoned by his parents, and since then, he became an orphan and also started committing crimes. At the age of 13, he was arrested for possession of guns and drugs. Then he was arrested for car theft and armed robbery. Then he robbed a bank and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. After being released from prison, he committed the crime of illegal intrusion and was arrested again. Finally, he was sent to Alcatraz. The biggest reason why this person was sent to Alcatraz was that he often escaped from prison, and many times successfully, so later, before being put in this prison, they measured his IQ. His IQ was as high as 133, among the top among prisoners. The Anglin brothers were rural children, 1 year apart in age. When they were young, because they didn't want to farm, they entered society early. Since the age of 20, they have been continuously committing crimes, mainly robbing banks. The last time was when they were 27 and 28 years old. They were arrested for robbing a bank. One was sentenced to 15 years in prison and the other was sentenced to 20 years. These 2 were also sent to this island due to multiple escapes. Finally, there was the person named Alan West. He started committing crimes at the age of 16, and before the age of 28, he was arrested a total of 20 times, so most of his life was spent in prison. And during the arrest, this person also escaped from prison many times, and finally he was sent to Alcatraz. These 4 people, in addition to the common point of frequently escaping from prison, also had another point in common, that they were all about the same age. Oh, and they were all born during the Great Depression in the United States. It seems that in that era, crimes such as bank robbery were very common. These 4 people knew each other before going to Alcatraz, but they didn't know each other in society, but in prison. And there was one more thing that led to the 4 of them escaping together, which was that their prison cells were next to each other. In December 1961, they began planning their escape. The mastermind and planner of this escape was also the oldest, with a sky-high IQ. First, the 4 of them spent about half a year starting to prepare supplies and tools in the prison camp. These tools included glue, spoons, soap, toothpaste, toilet paper, hair, towels, raincoats, vacuum cleaners. It sounds like these things are useless, but in a moment I'll let you know that they all have a very important role. First, they gradually mixed more than 50 raincoats from the prison camp. They cut the raincoats to make a rubber boat, gluing the pieces of raincoat together. They didn't use glue, but used a method of melting the raincoats to stick them together like a big boat. However, it was extremely difficult to inflate it. It would take hours to inflate, so that definitely wouldn't work. Actually, they used the tube of an accordion to inflate it. It turned out that there were musical performances in the prison. The good thing was that there were musical instruments, and prisoners with extremely good behavior would be asked to play musical instruments. The oldest prisoner took advantage of this to get an accordion. It was actually to inflate the boat, but how could they know that raincoats could be made into a rubber boat? It was later discovered that he often went to the library in the prison. The good condition was to be able to read the magazine that he often read. Later, when they took it out, they discovered that it had published an article about how to survive in the wild. There was a passage in it that said that if you were swept away by a flood, things like raincoats could be inflated, they wouldn't leak, and then they could be made into something that could float on the water. Maybe that's why he thought that this could be made into something useful at sea. Then, they tore the raincoats into 4 life jackets and waterproof bags. These bags were for storing personal belongings. After that, they used suitable pieces of wood to make paddles. And so, the equipment for moving on the sea was complete. So how do you get from the prison cell to the sea? You need to dig a hole in the cell. They stole small metal from the kitchen, but spoons alone wouldn't do anything. Because the walls were all concrete, digging with a spoon wouldn't work. So they stole the motor of a vacuum cleaner, clamped the spoon into the motor, connected it to the electricity in the room, and turned it into an electric drill. And you couldn't just drill randomly, there was a ventilation hole under the water tank. They drilled this vent hole larger so that people could get through. And where did this vent lead to? It turned out that there was a wooden repair corridor, for repairing electricity and storing water in this prison. It was similar to the structure in the movie Prison Break. But there was one problem, which was that the electric drill they made themselves, once used, would make a very loud noise and would be exposed. So what to do? They took advantage of the sound of musical instruments. That's right, all the prisoners who behaved well in this prison were allowed to play musical instruments. And every day there was a fixed time for them to perform. At that time, when the prison was the noisiest, they took this opportunity to start drilling the wall. Actually, there was no need to drill a big hole, just make the ventilation hole a little bigger, so that one person could get through. So the time they spent drilling the wall wasn't too long, and they didn't need to drill every day. Just a few days before leaving, the 4 of them drilled their own holes. All 4 of them had to drill because each person had their own room. It wasn't like in the movie The Shawshank Redemption, where it took more than 10 years to dig a tunnel to connect, and digging it early would easily be discovered. It turned out that in addition to these things, they needed to do some very important things. It was only later that they saw this. This was truly a brilliant move. After they crawled out, there would be a room check in the evening, and if they were not found in the room during the check, the alarm would be immediately sounded and they would not be able to escape. They were not like Schofield. Schofield only needed to get over the wall to be considered successful, while they not only had to get over the wall but also had to get to the sea to be considered successful. So the longer the time, the better, so it was best not to be discovered all night. So how do you get past this room check? They used soap, toothpaste, concrete, toilet paper, and hair collected to make 4 fake human heads. This whole fake head was very well made, with a layer of human skin color painted on it. Where did they get this amount of color from? Because prisoners with good behavior were allowed to paint, one of the 4 had requested to paint and had paint available. Then, before escaping, they used this paint to paint the fake heads, put them on the beds, and then covered them with towels to look like they were sleeping. After everything was fully prepared, on the evening of June 11, 1962, they began their escape. Everyone brought a jacket, paddles. Frank had to carry the boat, of course, still not inflated, protruding from the ventilation hole. Of the 4, only Alan West couldn't get out. Why couldn't he get out? It was because when he drilled the ventilation hole at first, he drilled it a bit too big. A few days earlier, he had finished drilling his holes, and he was afraid of being discovered, so he used cement to cover it up a bit. He thought that he would just pry it open on the day of the escape. As a result, on the day of the escape, the cement had hardened, and he couldn't pry it open because it would make a very loud noise. If he just dug it out with his hands little by little, it would take hours. Finally, when he got out and found that the other 3 were no longer there, they had clearly left long ago. The 3 of them had already determined the escape route as follows: crawl out from the ventilation hole, follow the repair path to the end. There was a staircase that could lead directly to the roof. After climbing onto the roof, go up to the roof of the kitchen, where there was a chimney, follow the chimney down to the ground. Then continue on the ground, along the sand, to go down to the sea. Then, inflate the boat and set off. Alan West, after getting out, found that the other three were no longer there. He also followed that route down. But when he got to the roof, he found that it was just dawn. It was already morning. If he escaped, he would be discovered, so he had to go back to the cell along the old road and continue sleeping. Because those fake heads had fooled the police, in fact, the time when the police discovered that the three had escaped was during the roll call the next morning. The three of them did not come out for roll call, so the police went into the room to check and saw that these three were still sleeping. They touched the heads, and the heads fell to the ground, making the police terrified. Later, the police were also surprised and admired that these fake heads were made so realistically. The facial features, lines, and colors on them were exactly like real people. Back to the story, after discovering that 3 people had disappeared, the police also discovered a hole in West's cell. So the police knew the whole story, from how they planned, how they escaped, and when these people escaped. At the same time, West actively cooperated with the police in hunting down the other 3, so in the end he did not suffer any heavy punishment. Then, after confirming that 3 people had escaped, the police sounded the alarm, started searching the entire island, and immediately dispatched patrol boats to search the sea within a wide range. Actually, the police search was not only discovered late, but in fact, the large-scale search was also delayed because that day 2 prison officers were absent, on leave. And at that time, there were no phones, so no one could contact the prison officers. After that, they finally got in touch, and then they started a wide-range search. After 10 days of searching at sea, the police only found a paddle on the sea. This paddle was exactly the same as the one they left in the prison, which was the paddle that Alan West was supposed to take. This proved that it was the one they had made. Furthermore, the police found 2 life jackets made from raincoats. One was found in the bay, and one was found offshore. These 2 jackets floated on the water without any damage. The police also found a waterproof bag made from a raincoat. Inside the bag were objects related to the Anglin brothers, such as some photos of them and photos of their relatives and friends. There was also a piece of paper with contact information for friends and relatives. Everything found was intact. It can be seen that they spent a lot of time preparing. In the end, the police still couldn't find the rubber boat, but they found some pieces of raincoat. People speculated that the boat must have been broken by the waves and turned into these fragments. If the rubber boat was broken, their chances of escaping successfully were not high. Why? Because when it's stormy, this sea area is extremely dangerous, especially when they were traveling at night. Even though it was June, the sea water was only 10 degrees. Just 10 minutes in the water and their bodies would start to cramp and they would lose control. And then, due to the low body temperature, they would become unconscious, and eventually they would drown or freeze to death. Another thing that made the police believe that the 3 prisoners must not have escaped was that sharks are often active at night. If they were injured during the escape, they would likely become targets for sharks. Moreover, even if they successfully made it to shore, the other side was not a deserted, uninhabited place. The other side of the bay was a very bustling and lively place, with people everywhere, and people coming and going day and night. Those wearing prison clothes and escaping by swimming ashore would have been spotted immediately. Because there were also police patrols. The fact is that after a long period of investigation and inquiry, no one saw anyone wearing prison clothes or anyone suspicious coming ashore. Therefore, the police speculated that the 3 prisoners must have drowned in the vast, cold sea. Even though the police believed that the chances of them drowning in the vast sea were very high, the search never stopped. Moreover, the FBI also issued a nationwide wanted notice. After the wanted notice was issued, the police received a lot of information. People said that in this place and that place, there were people who looked very similar to the 3 escaped prisoners. As a result, the police ran everywhere but all confirmed that it was not them. Half a year after these 3 escaped, another person on Alcatraz escaped. This person was named John Paul Scott. He had no boat, no help from any tools, just simply swam across the bay. However, after swimming to shore, he became unconscious due to hypothermia. He was discovered by a passing child who immediately reported it to the police. The police arrived and saw that it was an escaped prisoner. At first, they thought he was dead, but after checking, they found that he was still alive. John Paul Scott was sentenced to 30 years in prison for bank robbery. At the time of his escape, he was also accompanied by another person named Darrell Lee Parker. The two of them were allowed to work in the dining hall due to their good behavior. On the night of the escape, they hid in the kitchen and did not return to their cells. The police did not find out. At night, the two of them went everywhere from the kitchen and finally found a window. Breaking this window, they jumped down the cliff and started swimming. As a result, when jumping from the cliff, Darrell Lee Parker broke his leg. Even though his leg was broken, he still went into the water to swim. After swimming for a while, he reached a rock and couldn't continue, so Darrell Lee Parker stopped there, while John Paul Scott continued swimming. Finally, John Paul Scott swam to shore. The fact that John Paul Scott made it to shore made the police suddenly think of the other three, who might have escaped successfully. Because those three had a boat, life jackets, and John Paul Scott had nothing. Actually, it couldn't be said that John Paul Scott didn't prepare anything. He also prepared 2 rubber gloves. These gloves, after being inflated, could also be used as life preservers, could also have swum to the other side. It was December, the coldest time, and he still swam across the bay. When this news was published in the newspapers, the American people were very surprised. Seeing that, many people started to challenge themselves to cross the bay. Of course, they couldn't go to Alcatraz Island to swim, so they arranged a point near the island and jumped down and swam to shore to see if they could swim. However, these people all swam during the day, because there were sharks at night. Finally, reporters interviewed some challengers. Most of these people were professional swimmers. They said that the waves in this bay area were very strong, and even they did not dare to swim down. Professional swimmers also said that if they were professional athletes, they might be able to do it, but for ordinary people, it was really too difficult. There were 2 main reasons. First, the water temperature was too low, and second, the wind, waves, and currents were too strong. With the physical strength of ordinary people, it was not enough to resist the current. Professional athletes, because their bodies were well adjusted, their physical strength was also good, and they were trained for a long time, so they could swim to shore. As for ordinary people, it was almost impossible. When the reporters came to this conclusion, the police remembered something. Back then, when they were investigating the case, they also asked some prisoners if they had any impressions of the 3 escaped prisoners, if they understood anything about them. These prisoners all said that the Anglin brothers were in extremely good health, best at sports, they knew everything, such as baseball, running. They ran extremely fast. After that, the police went to investigate the files and found that the Anglin brothers lived in the sea area and had very good swimming ability. In this way, the chances of the Anglin brothers escaping successfully were indeed very high. In fact, after this incident, from 1963, Alcatraz prison was closed. Moreover, starting from 1972, this place began to become a tourist area, under the management of the national park. Just pay money and you can go to the island to visit. There's a very good movie called The Rock, which was filmed here. Then, for over 50 years, there was no progress in the case, and it was unknown whether those 3 prisoners had escaped successfully or not. It was until 2013 that the San Francisco police received a letter. The letter stated that this person's name was John Anglin, and he claimed to be John Anglin, one of the 3 prisoners who escaped that year. He wrote in the letter, "The 3 of us escaped successfully, and even lived together for a while." He said that if the police agreed to put this news on the news, he would let the police know where he was. Moreover, he could also return to Alcatraz prison, but only serve a maximum of 1 year. But the police had to agree to treat him medically. As for the police, they thought this was a hoax and didn't pay attention to it. Later, John Anglin's nephew also spoke up. He knew that these 3 people had actually survived, and also knew that after they escaped, they lived together for a while, until 1975, meaning they lived together for 13 years. Then, to prove that he was telling the truth, in 2016, he provided the police with a photo. The two people in the photo were his two uncles. One was John Anglin, and the other was Clarence Anglin. This photo was taken in 1975, and the location was in Brazil. The police then sent this photo to forensic and experts for verification. The experts, through personal identification, judged that the photo was likely real. Judging from the shape, appearance, and features, compared with the documents of the prisoners that the police had, it was indeed them. This nephew also didn't know where these three people were currently. He said that John Anglin was probably still alive, while Clarence Anglin had probably passed away. He didn't know anything about Frank Morris. In fact, this incident could perfectly explain why those three prisoners were not discovered, and it wasn't until later that there was news. It was because they had gone to Brazil, lived their whole lives in Brazil, and never returned to the United States. The mother of this nephew, who was the younger sister of John and Clarence Anglin, also confirmed to the police that the two of them, after escaping, sent a card home every Christmas. There was no stamp on this card, and the signature on it belonged to the Anglin brothers, proving that these two had survived. Later, the police released a document confirming that in the 1960s, when investigating the case, the police had suspected that the three prisoners had fled to Brazil. Why? Because at that time, there was a coup in Brazil, and Brazil was very large, with many people. American wanted criminals, as long as they fled to Brazil, basically disappeared among the sea of people. It's not to say that Brazil would accept these escaped criminals, it's just that Brazil at that time had no one to manage them. In fact, not only the United States, at that time, escaped criminals from all over the world fled to Brazil. There were also people wanted by the Nazis who fled to Brazil. But there were very few Americans in Brazil. Why? It was because Brazil was a very poor country. Brazilians all fled to the United States, and no one fled to Brazil. Moreover, at that time, Brazil had political turmoil. Serious business people all fled from Brazil, not to it. Therefore, at that time, it was very rare to see Americans in Brazil. Later, some people said that they had seen the Anglin brothers in Brazil, saying that they were farming there to this day. The San Francisco police are still searching for these three escaped prisoners. If they were still alive, the Anglin brothers would probably be around 90, 91 years old, and Frank Morris would be 94, 95 years old. According to U.S. law, cases need to be investigated until all prisoners reach the age of 99, then they will no longer be investigated. Therefore, this case still has about 5 to 10 years before it is closed. Thank you for watching. If you'd like, you can subscribe to watch the next videos. Or if you have time, you can watch other videos on this channel.